Okay. Um, I just wanted to bring up, do you remember the pond scum analogy that I made a while ago?
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to inquire as to how exactly you are going to address the post-Darwinian reality within which we find ourselves. And I would say Darwin dismantled the teleological ladder. He didn't just provide a new origin story, he revealed that complexity is merely a byproduct of survival, not a signature of intent. So Nietzsche grasped this immediately. If we are emergent from primeval slime, then any true will is not a divine spark, but a biological imperative masked by poetic delusions and quantum fantasies.
I would question
My
Darwin's.
honorable opponent, wait, hold on. My honorable opponent here faces a devastating paradox of authority. Crowley himself, the architect of the very system he defends, revered Nietzsche not merely as a philosopher, but as a prophet and the avatar of Thoth. To Crowley, Nietzsche was the literal messenger of the gods and a literal intellectual incarnation of Hermes Trismegistus. Therefore, if you hold Crowley's insight in any esteem, you are logically bound to the act to accept the primacy of his prophet Nietzsche. You cannot curate Nietzsche. You can't. You have to consume all of it. Nietzsche's core message is that the clinging to the true will, you are ignoring the very avatar of wisdom that Crowley has commanded you to heed. You're attempting to salvage a ghost in the machine that both Darwinian science and Nietzschean philosophy have already exorcised. To put it in a phrase from the Bible, Crowley and the true will specifically has already been weighed, measured, and found wanting. If Nietzsche is indeed the messenger of this new aeon, then his message is clear. The self is a fiction, the will is the drive for power, and rituals are merely a high cultured aesthetic draped over the cold reality of our evolutionary descent. To follow Crowley while ignoring the Darwinian reality in which we find ourselves is like engaging in a nihilism of the highest order. Nietzsche is not a high IQ mysticism, and I think it's a failure of systemic logic that our system believes. I think it's actually truly a product of the herd. I think that any culture that pushes moral relativism is doomed to fail because it's only doing so in order to maintain the fiction of safety and peace and plurality within a multipolar system. So we wouldn't need to make this force moral relativism on people like a herd if we didn't already have conflict because there's different groups and the only way we can maintain this fantasy is to pretend like everyone's perspective is valid, even the people who we know have invalid perspectives. So I would say that Nietzsche flies in the face of this herd mentality, and Darwin as well, because Darwin and Nietzsche are both great men out of history. And I think that at the time, what the things that they were saying were seen as so damaging and destructive that they were seen as like the most awful people in society by like the majority, by the herd. But now we kind of take what they say and we kind of go, yeah, that like kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So like over time, we kind of
Mhm.
see them a little bit differently than the people, their contemporaries, right? Kind of like how people at the time, I'm sure there were a lot of people who hated Socrates because of the plays that were done about him, where they lampooned him, and then there were the authorities and the public trials and everything. I'm sure that after there were a lot of people who actually at the time who didn't feel very positive about these people, but the truth is that the reason why the herd has overwhelmed the majority, actually Nietzsche would have said took place like when Christianity took over the Roman Empire.
Yeah. First of all,
So that's what he would have said.
I would like to invite you to consider that morality isn't really something that the herd is really what's the word they're not really privileged to consider it anyways because what will if as a common person myself, I mean in a metaphysical intellectual uh what is it in that way, I'm not probably the herd, but just as a common person, I'm subject to the law, and practically everyone is. But I mean, like, look at Epstein. Practically he's someone like that isn't subject to the law. So I think for someone who's in common circumstances, who also, if we talk about more metaphorically, metaphysically, that they're subject to the will of those around them, that they haven't even begun the fight to own themselves. Such people, it's like multiple layers of their actions are actually hedged by society, the people around them, the law. So I think such people are so profoundly unfree that to talk about moral relativism as if it would come into the conversation of statecraft or anything like that. Maybe if people were really, if we get a culture in the near future where people really are in that position of owning themselves, of quote unquote being awake, of being their own selves, thinking for themselves, etc., etc. In that case, perhaps then, excuse me. In that case, maybe it would be okay to talk about statecraft with that in mind. I mean, I suppose democracy in Greece maybe worked for some period of time before, they're just humoring every moron who was going to voice their opinion. I don't know. But yeah, I think as far as for like common folk, um, you almost have to get to a certain level of consciousness to even graduate into the conversation of morality, because a common person is in no position to decide for themselves in a big way. Like um, people choose which college to go to, this job over that job, but how much of that is influenced by their parents, by their friends, by what sounded good at the time, what was advertised by institutions and the government. So I would say, and this is getting a little bit into what is free will, because even people that say people that are deep in the left wing community, LGBT community, something like that, that's a little more anarchistic in some ways, they're still operating within the parameters of their community. And, um, having lived in a squat, I've seen a little bit of that where there is no particular rule set, and yeah, it practically doesn't work. Um, though it kind of works if everyone like keeps themselves and has their own, kind of understands what other people, what they can sort of do and not do, what they can get away with against others, etc. But that's why I'm saying that I don't think morality you can really apply it down when we talk about um, who, because who has choice really? Because who has choice to make these decisions of morality? Okay, maybe someone's a serial killer and they're just part of quote unquote the herd. But even then, such a person is just pretending to be one of the herd. So I think there's a consciousness leap that someone actually has to make to even be outside of the herd in the first place. And I think it's a really kind of a weird, obtuse thing. But I've found that to be true, and um, you know, even that I think logically it's true that yeah, the average person can't just go and stab someone at the supermarket. You know what I mean? Now going back to the whole pond scum thing, I don't actually take Darwin that seriously. I think he looked at like the beaks of birds, and then he was like, oh, they everything evolves now. I kind of think he was I personally would speculate that he imported some occult philosophy in. Like we look at like say Helena Blavatsky, um, how she talked about how we evolved into from like plasma people into what we are now. I'm guessing that a lot of these ideas have been bubbling under the surface secretly, kept hush hush by whatever organizations for a long period of time. But in any case, I just don't take it seriously that Darwin is like looking at birds' beaks and is like, oh, everything evolved because I saw some birds' beaks change, and actually we haven't really observed much, what is it, evolution, except on a very small scale. Possibly it's a very temporary phenomenon, very temporary adaptations. So, the thing that, oh, we came from pond scum, I simply don't think that that's the case. I won't get into my like weird conspiracy theories about, how I think we're descended from aliens basically, but and then that just moves it to where did they come from? Well, honestly, I don't exactly know, but I think in our realm there is some design, there are some purposes. I don't know how, expansive that sort of thing is, but I think it's interesting that most of the old texts do have some idea about what our existence here ultimately means. Okay, maybe it's not one particular thing, but I think it's kind of a newfangled thing, and maybe an aberration to say that, oh, we came from pond scum and now our biology is making this reality we live in and experience, etc., etc. So yeah. Okay.
So I just am curious, do you think that if you were gonna ask, do you think that the herd would be more receptive to moral relativism or universal morality, given the fact that there's a proclivity for universal moralists to become more elitist? And it seems to be like it seems that it both have their bad aspects, right? Like Nietzsche obviously trying to destroy Plato and trying to destroy God and trying to destroy Christianity and all basically everything. Nietzsche, Nietzsche literally tried to replace himself with Jesus and Plato. Like he tried to put himself above all of these people, basically. Like he was kind of trying to demonstrate what a great man would attempt to do or could do, essentially, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Well, sorry, the
And he was actually a poet.
what
Hmm?
was the first question you asked though? I forgot when you said the second thing.
I said, do you think that the morality of the you think the herd would be more receptive to the morality of moral relativism or that of the Ubermensch and the great man or woman theories and universal morality?
I think it's chaotic, but I actually, in my experience, I think that, uh, quote unquote, the herd. It's like maybe people make themselves the herd by playing into, not to get political, but like left wing, right wing, right? Um, I think a lot of people like on the right wing, I would say people are more into that there's some values that are so important that need to be upheld, and on the left wing, it's like, oh, if we just take off, the training wheels, we could get really far, and those training wheels are practically morality and a whole bunch of other things. It's a little bit different here in Europe, but just for the right wingers, I think the herd typically are very much just being around right wing people that they do like the ultimate reality. Maybe if I lived in the cities and was around left wingers, I would see a similar pattern. So my guess is gonna be that it's chaotic and that quote unquote the herd just gets excited about whatever the strong people around them are doing or what they hear on TV or I think people are unfortunately pretty dumb typically, but I'm not sure why because I remember you mentioned to me the thing from Men in Black. Individuals are smart, but people are dumb. I've experienced that a lot, but even persons, I think I really have to say I think it spells. People will have such strong opinions about something and be really unwilling to listen and be very quick to think that your point of view is, to be basically polarized against you, to think your point of view is disgusting or some in some way immoral. Um, yeah, I would say it's chaotic. I think that people tend to just jump on things that that they like, perhaps without much thought. I don't know. I
So
honestly. Mhm.
I have a question for you. It's kind of a double bind, so be prepared.
Okay.
Okay, primary injunction. You must express your true will. Secondary injunction. At a more abstract level, contradicting the first. You must submit to the authority of the prophet system to find it. Tertiary injunction. You cannot leave the field, e.g., if you fail, you aren't high IQ or adept enough. As Nietzsche would say, never trust a large book of deductive philosophy. The paradox of the true will is that if the true will is truly individual and emergent, as Nietzsche's true will to power is, then by what systemic logic must it be discovered through the prepackaged system of a 19th century hermetic framework? Are you actually finding yourself, or are you just speaking to a more exoteric or exotic dialect of the herd? Because I think that ceremonial magic, perhaps it was part, I think it is part of the elite for sure. You can definitely see a lot of the elites participating in it. So I don't think that it is of the herd, but the problem is that once the herd gets hold of it, they kind of like destroy everything that's good essentially about it, about that thing. And kind of, I like to say that ideas have to be chopped and cooked because before they can be served and ate. And the masses can't eat the steak, they can only eat baby food,
Yeah,
right?
I have noticed this a lot in the occult. In fact, the LBRP, even first pit stop of ceremonial magic, can make people ill. Theoretically, it could kill them if they're not, ready. That's why in Liber O, written by Crowley, it says that you should be a master of like several of these different things mentioned there. Some of them are meditations, and some of them are different forms of divination. But basically, your consciousness needs to be, you know, to swole. We'll say swole. You gotta work the muscle up here. Um,
That's why I
so
think philosophy's helped me a lot because it's helped me basically understand these perspectives. Like I can absorb all of these perspectives, like Nietzsche said, like one must become an ocean in order to absorb this kind of toxicity without becoming destroyed by it. And I think that also Aristotle helps me as well because he would say that you have to entertain ideas without accepting them. And I think that I'm capable of entertaining all of these ideas and engaging with them in kind of like an intellectual sandbox capacity. Like I put them in this kind of environment where we can do thought experiments with them. And we don't have to become super offended and angry that other people have different opinions. We can just entertain those opinions in the sandbox and
yeah,
play around with them and figure out what logical conclusions are rather than and all the exceptions and whatever, because philosophy is usually kind of like arguments between both of us where we basically just bring up crazy exceptions to our each other's systems and then force each other to like subject the other opponent to these crazy exceptions that like are probably not even relevant in reality, but that's
hmm
what philosophy becomes sometimes, is kind of this like obsession with these like fringe cases essentially in order to disprove a theory. But it honestly does work though. That's why we're obsessed with it. It's because it sounds crazy, right? But in reality, it's like if you can think of a fringe case that can completely disprove a theory, then that theory has to be reworked to incorporate that new information. Otherwise, it just becomes delusional. Right. And I think that the moral relativism is like one of those systems that refuses to accept new information. It's a closed loop system, essentially, right? It doesn't allow for new information to be updated. So moral relativism says, nope, I dismiss all truth claims, which is a truth claim, right? All truth claims are just completely valid, and we're not gonna say one person is true, one person is false. Everything is true, right? Or everything is false. I don't know. You could argue that it's kind of a negation. It's kind of a Wittgensteinian negation of the morality itself, essentially, right? Like they're basically instead of actually making an argument against morality or trying to negate it, they understand just as well as because they probably, a lot of these left wingers and neoliberals probably studied like I did at the European universities and stuff like that, and learned from these people and realized from the logical positivists and from the Vienna Circle and Wittgenstein and stuff that you can't actually dismantle metaphysics, which includes morality, with language. So they just basically tried to negate it and say, no, we're just going to push all of it aside and we're not going to talk about it. You know? So what they've done, they've basically done a gigantic disservice, basically. And you can honestly see that taking place in other communist nations where they kind of forbid people to talk about politics and it's just a one party system. You know what I mean? It's like you're not allowed, like you said, like morality is not for the plebs, right? Like who are you as a plebeian to have an opinion?
Lol.
Essentially, right? Like opinions are only for the people at the top, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I would definitely argue that you can't really say like in order to just because that's why the moral relativists basically they're engaging in like a Wittgensteinian negation of morality because they know that they can't defeat Socrates and they can't defeat Plato, they can't defeat Darwin, they can't defeat Nietzsche, they can't defeat any of these people. So they're just going to say, you know what, we're not even going to allow this debate to take place. We're just going to sideline it and we're going to say anybody who even suggests that anybody is wrong ever is actually breaking faith with our universal tolerance, which also happens to be a belief system that they adhere to, which goes
Interesting.
against fundamentally against their system. So moral relativism is essentially just like a modern attempt to basically sidestep the entire past debate that you said we should bring up. And I 100% agree with you. I think in reality, I don't even think you are a moral relativist. I think that you have a lot of different appeals to a lot of different spiritual authorities. And I totally am appreciative of that. I want you to have as many opinions as possible. I want you to be free and I want you to make your own decisions. That fundamentally puts you at odds with moral relativists.